The morning of July 5, 1943, Eastern Front, Kursk salient. Soviet artillery Lieutenant Viktor Petrovich crouched in a camouflaged observation post, watching the horizon through field glasses as the ground began to tremble. He could feel it before he could see it, a low, mechanical rumble that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Then, through the heat shimmer of the Ukrainian summer, they appeared. The silhouettes of German Tiger tanks, their massive hulls catching the early light, advancing in wedge formation toward prepared Soviet positions. What happened in the next 4 hours would shatter the myth of the Tiger's invincibility, not through superior firepower or heavier armor, but through something far more insidious, a carefully constructed web of obstacles, mines, and coordinated fire that would transform 70-ton steel monsters into immobilized coffins. This is the story of how Soviet defensive engineering, not a single soldier's trap, but a masterfully orchestrated system of obstacles and ambushes, destroyed 11 Tiger tanks in a single sector during the opening hours of Operation Citadel. It's a story that reveals a fundamental truth about modern warfare. The greatest weapon is often not the tank itself, but the ground beneath it, the Tiger tank. By the summer of 1943, this name alone could freeze the blood of Allied tank crews from Normandy to the Caucasus. The Panzerkampfwagen WWII Tiger Ausführung I, to use its proper designation, represented the apex of German armoured engineering. 62 tons of rolled steel, powered by a Maybach HL 230 P45 engine producing 700 horsepower. Its main gun, the 88mm Querc 36 litres 56, could penetrate 100 millimeters of armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. The Tiger's own armor, 100 millimeters thick on the front, 80 on the sides, made it virtually impervious to most Allied anti-tank weapons when engaged frontally. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Germans knew what they had created. Internal Wehrmacht documents from early 1943 described the Tiger as the sword of the panzer divisions. During the winter counteroffensive at Kharkov in February and March 1943, a single Tiger battalion had claimed over 500 enemy tanks destroyed. The mathematics were stark. A Tiger could engage and destroy a Soviet 34 from distances where the Russian tank's 76mm gun was effectively useless. In Tunisia, British 6-pounder anti-tank guns had watched their armor-piercing rounds literally bounce off Tiger hulls from ranges of less than 200 meters. But the Tiger had weaknesses. Fundamental, catastrophic weaknesses that Soviet engineers and tactical planners had been studying since the first Tigers appeared near Leningrad in August 1942. The first captured Tiger, disabled by anti-tank guns and mines near the Roba Valley in Tunisia in January 1943, had been dissected by British and later Soviet technical intelligence teams. They discovered something crucial. While the Tiger was nearly invincible from the front, it was vulnerable from above, from below, and from the sides. More importantly, it was mechanically complex, fuel-hungry, and extraordinarily heavy. That weight, 62 tons, was both the Tiger's strength and its fatal flaw. The tracks, though wide at 725 millimeters, exerted a ground pressure of over 1 kilogram per square centimeter. This meant that terrain which might merely slow a lighter tank could immobilize a Tiger entirely. Mud, sand, soft ground, damaged bridges, all became potential death traps. And there was something else. The Tiger's Maybach engine, powerful as it was, consumed fuel at a terrifying rate. On roads, the tank achieved roughly 100 kilometers per 200 liters of fuel. Off-road, in combat conditions, that figure could drop to 60 kilometers. A Tiger that ran out of fuel, or broke down, or threw a track, became 62 tons of immobile steel. The Soviet General Staff understood this. In the spring of 1943, as intelligence reports confirmed that the Germans were massing armor for a summer offensive, Operation Citadel, Soviet commanders made a critical decision. They would not attempt to match the Germans tank for tank. The 34, excellent as it was, could not reliably defeat a Tiger in direct combat. Instead, they would do something more fundamental. They would turn the battlefield itself into a weapon. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, coordinating the defense of the Kursk salient, issued a directive in April 1943 that would reshape anti-tank warfare. The Red Army would construct not one, not two, but 8 successive defensive belts around the Kursk bulge. Each belt would consist of extensive trench networks, artillery positions, anti-tank gun emplacements, and most crucially, massive obstacle systems designed specifically to channel and immobilize German armor. The engineering effort was staggering. Over 300,000 civilians, mostly women and older men, were mobilized alongside military engineers. They dug anti-tank ditches some 4 meters deep and 6 meters wide, stretching for hundreds of kilometers. They installed tens of thousands of wooden stakes and metal hedgehogs. They strung coils of barbed wire, not the simple fencing used in the First World War, but heavy concertina wire specifically designed to wrap around tank tracks and drive wheels. And they laid mines. 943,000 anti-tank mines were buried across the Kursk salient by early July. But the true innovation lay not in any single obstacle, but in how these obstacles were combined and positioned. Soviet anti-tank doctrine, refined through 2 years of brutal combat, had evolved into something the Germans called the pack front, though the Soviets had independently developed and perfected the concept. Groups of anti-tank guns, typically 5 to 10 weapons, would be positioned in mutually supporting positions, completely camouflaged, commanding overlapping fields of fire. The guns themselves ranged from 76mm divisional guns to the powerful new 85mm anti-aircraft guns, hastily retasked for anti-tank work, when it was discovered they could penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. These gun positions were not placed randomly. They were sited to cover specific kill zones, areas where attacking tanks would be channeled by obstacles, slowed by mines, and forced to present their vulnerable sides or rear armor to waiting gunners. The mathematics were brutal. A Tiger moving at full speed across open ground was a difficult target. A Tiger immobilized by a mine, or forced to slow to navigate obstacles, or attempting to cross an anti-tank ditch, became a stationary target, and stationary armor, no matter how heavily armored, could be destroyed by concentrated fire. The Germans knew an offensive was coming. Indeed, they had been planning Operation Citadel since March. The objective was straightforward: pinch off the Kursk salient with simultaneous attacks from north and south, encircle and destroy the Soviet armies trapped within, and regain the strategic initiative lost at Stalingrad. For this operation, the Wehrmacht had assembled its finest units. Army Group Center in the north, under Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, fielded the 9th Army with 900,000 men. Army Group South, under Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, deployed similar forces. Between them, nearly 3,000 tanks and assault guns, including over 200 Tigers and the newly deployed Panther tanks. Hitler had delayed the offensive multiple times, insisting on waiting for more Tiger and Panther tanks to arrive from German factories. This delay from May to July proved catastrophic. Every week of delay gave Soviet engineers more time to fortify, to mine, to prepare. By the time Operation Citadel finally launched on July 5, 1943, the Red Army had created the most heavily fortified defensive position in military history. The density of obstacles was unprecedented. In some sectors, Soviet engineers had laid 2,500 anti-personnel mines and 2,200 anti-tank mines per kilometer of front. That's roughly 1 mine every 40 centimeters. The minefields weren't laid in simple belts, but in irregular patterns specifically designed to funnel attacking armor into predetermined channels. These channels appeared, from a German tank commander's perspective, to be the safe routes through the defenses. In reality, they led directly into zones covered by multiple anti-tank gun positions, pre-registered artillery concentrations, and secondary minefields. Lieutenant Petrovich, in his observation post on that morning of July 5th, was part of this vast defensive machine. His unit, the 72nd Anti-Tank Regiment, commanded a sector roughly 2 kilometers wide. Within that sector, 5 separate gun positions had been prepared, each containing 2 76mm guns and supporting infantry with anti-tank rifles. The guns were dug into pits with overhead camouflage, invisible from more than 300 meters. Their fields of fire overlapped, ensuring that any tank entering the kill zone would face fire from multiple directions simultaneously. The ground in front of his position looked deceptively normal. Gently rolling steppe, tall summer grass, a few scattered trees, but beneath that innocent surface lay a lethal tapestry. Wire obstacles, strung low to the ground and difficult to see, had been positioned at intervals, calculated to wrap around tank tracks. Behind the wire, a belt of anti-tank mines stretched 200 meters in depth. The mines themselves were a mix of Soviet TM-41 anti-tank mines, each containing 5.5 kilograms of TNT, and captured German telemine 42 seconds. A single mine could blow a track off even a Tiger. Multiple mines, daisy-chained together, could destroy the tank entirely. Beyond the minefield, an anti-tank ditch 4 meters deep, its sides carefully angled to prevent tanks from climbing out, ran perpendicular to the expected German axis of advance. The ditch wasn't continuous, however. Soviet engineers had left specific gaps, reinforced crossing points that appeared passable. These gaps were, of course, pre-registered kill zones, covered by every anti-tank gun in the sector. As the Tigers approached, Petrovich could count 11 of them now, advancing in textbook Panzerkeil formation with medium Panzer IVs, protecting their flanks. The entire defensive plan crystallized. The German tactics were sound, Tigers at the tip of the wedge, using their superior armor and firepower to punch through resistance, with lighter tanks exploiting any breach. On open ground, against unprepared defenders, this formation was nearly unstoppable. But this was not open ground, and these were not unprepared defenders. The first Tiger struck a mine at 07:15 hours. Petrovich watched through his field glasses as the massive tank lurched violently, its left track disintegrating in a fountain of earth and steel. The explosion, multiple TM-41 mines linked together, tore away not just the track but several road wheels. The Tiger slewed sideways, its commander's hatch popping open as smoke began billowing from the engine deck. The crew would later report that the blast had also damaged the tank's fuel lines. Burning diesel was spreading beneath the hull, but doctrine held. The other Tigers didn't halt. They couldn't. Stopping in a minefield was death. The formation continued forward, commanders now scanning desperately for safe routes. This was the moment Soviet engineers had anticipated. Faced with visible mines ahead and a destroyed Tiger behind, the German tanks instinctively moved toward what appeared to be clearer ground, the prepared channels. 3 more Tigers found mines within the next 90 seconds. One detonated a cluster powerful enough to flip the tank's entire drive sprocket assembly off its mounting. Another, attempting to assist a damaged comrade, backed directly onto a mine that destroyed its rear idler wheel, immobilizing it immediately. The third took mine damage that appeared initially minor, a blown track section, but when the crew attempted to halt for repairs, they discovered they had stopped directly in a secondary minefield. The tank was effectively imprisoned by explosive devices on all sides. This was when the Soviet anti-tank guns opened fire. The doctrine was specific: do not fire at maximum range. Wait until the target is immobilized, slowed, or presenting a flank shot. Wait until the killing shot is certain. The first volley from Petrovich's sector came from 5 guns, firing nearly simultaneously at ranges between 600 and 800 meters. Not at the Tiger's frontal armor that would be futile, but at tracks, at the thinner side armor, at engine decks, at the vulnerable junction between turret and hull. An 85mm armor-piercing round, fired at 7,500 meters per second, carries tremendous kinetic energy. When it strikes the 80mm side armor of a Tiger at an angle approaching perpendicular, it doesn't bounce. It punches through, sending a shower of metal fragments and molten steel into the crew compartment. The internal carnage is immediate and horrific. Ammunition can cook off, fuel can ignite. Crew members, if they survive the initial penetration, have seconds to evacuate before their tank becomes an inferno. The The response was fierce but constrained. Tiger commanders attempted to identify and engage the Soviet gun positions, but the carefully camouflaged emplacements were nearly invisible. Firing at suspected positions revealed their locations through muzzle flash and smoke, but hitting a dug-in, protected gun position at combat ranges was extraordinarily difficult. Meanwhile, every moment the Tigers spent stationary, attempting to locate their attackers, more anti-tank rounds found their marks. One Tiger managed to score a direct hit on a Soviet gun position, killing the entire crew with a high-explosive shell. But the gun position had already fired 7 rounds, destroying 1 Panzer IV and damaging 2 more Tigers. The trade was asymmetric, and the Germans knew it. A 76mm anti-tank gun cost roughly 2,000 rubles to manufacture and could be crewed by soldiers trained in weeks. A Tiger tank cost 321,500 Reichsmarks to build, required a crew with months of specialized training. By 0800 hours, the attack in Petrovich's sector had completely stalled. Of the 11 Tigers that had entered the kill zone, 6 were burning, 3 were immobilized with track or suspension damage, and 2 had withdrawn after taking multiple non-penetrating hits that nonetheless damaged optics, gun mechanisms, and external equipment. The Panzer IVs and lighter tanks that had been following the Tigers had fared even worse. At least 15 were destroyed or abandoned. The German infantry, advancing behind the armor, found themselves pinned down by Soviet machine gun and mortar fire, unable to move forward without tank support, and unable to retreat across the minefields through which they had advanced. Some German combat engineers attempted to clear paths for recovery vehicles, but Soviet artillery, directed by observers like Petrovich, made such work nearly impossible. This pattern repeated across dozens of sectors, along the Kursk salient that morning. The massed German armor, concentrated for the decisive breakthrough that would win the summer campaign, instead ground itself to pieces against defenses it could not overcome with firepower alone. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The aftermath of that first day revealed the true effectiveness of the Soviet defensive system. In the northern sector, Field Marshal Model's 9th Army, despite fielding elements of the 505th Heavy Panzer Battalion, equipped with Tigers, advanced less than 10 kilometers. Of the 45 Ferdinand heavy tank destroyers committed to the assault, each weighing 70 tons and mounting an 88mm gun in a fixed casemate, 33 were immobilized by mine damage before 1700 hours. The Ferdinands, lacking machine guns for close defense and possessing poor mobility, became trapped in the Soviet obstacle network. Many were eventually abandoned by their crews and captured intact. In the southern sector, the situation was, if anything, more desperate for the Germans. General Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army, spearheaded by the elite Waffen-SS divisions Leibstandart Adolf Hitler, Das Reich, and Totenkopf, had been tasked with the main breakthrough toward Oboyan. These units fielded some of the most experienced tank crews in the Wehrmacht, men who had survived years of combat from France to the Caucasus. They advanced with confidence born of countless victories. That confidence died in the minefields. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, advancing in the center of the assault, ran directly into what Soviet engineers had designated Anti-Tank Resistance Point number 17, a particularly dense concentration of obstacles and guns. The division's war diary, recovered after the war, describes the morning of July 5th in stark terms. 05:45. Lead elements report contact with enemy obstacles. 06:30. Multiple mine strikes. Advance slowing. 07:15. Heavy anti-tank fire from concealed positions. Unable to identify gun locations. 0800. Casualties mounting. Request additional engineer support. The additional engineer support never materialized in sufficient numbers. German combat engineers, the Pioneer, were trained and equipped to clear minefields, but the scale and density of Soviet mining exceeded anything in their experience. Standard doctrine called for engineers to probe forward with metal detectors, mark safe lanes with tape, and manually lift or destroy mines. This process, under ideal conditions, might clear 100 meters of front in an hour. At Kursk, the minefield stretched for hundreds of meters in depth, covered by artillery and machine gun fire, and seeded with anti-personnel mines specifically designed to kill the engineers attempting to clear the anti-tank mines. Moreover, the iron-rich soil of the Ukrainian steppe played havoc with German metal detectors. The magnetic anomalies from natural iron deposits created countless false positives, slowing the detection process to a crawl. Soviet engineers, aware of this issue, had deliberately placed dummy metal plates throughout the minefields, further complicating detection efforts. German engineers found themselves probing and marking positions that contained nothing but scrap metal, while actual mines remained hidden nearby. The Goliath demolition vehicles, small, remotely controlled tracked bombs designed to clear mines and obstacles, proved largely ineffective. These devices, innovative in concept, were slow, unreliable, and highly visible. Soviet infantry quickly learned to target them with rifle fire, often detonating them prematurely or disabling their control systems. Of the hundreds deployed at Kursk, few accomplished their intended purpose. By midday on July 5th, the German offensive across both northern and southern sectors had achieved only limited penetrations. In the north, Model's forces had advanced roughly 10 kilometers at maximum depth. In the south, Hoth's panzers had pushed perhaps 15 kilometers into the Soviet First Defensive Belt. These were not breakthrough, they were grinds. Every meter gained cost tanks, vehicles, and men that the Wehrmacht could not afford to lose. The Tigers that had been immobilized but not destroyed presented their own challenges. Standard German doctrine called for recovery and repair of damaged armor whenever possible. A Tiger with a blown track could, in theory, be repaired in the field within a few hours, assuming replacement track sections and adequate tools were available. But recovering a disabled Tiger from a contested battlefield, under fire, across minefields, required specialized equipment and considerable time. The Panther recovery vehicles, Panthers modified with cranes and winches for tank recovery, were themselves targets. Soviet artillery observers specifically called fire on any vehicle attempting recovery operations. Multiple Panthers were destroyed or damaged while attempting to reach disabled Tigers. In some cases, German commanders made the agonizing decision to destroy their own immobilized Tigers with demolition charges rather than risk them falling into Soviet hands. The psychological impact of this deliberately destroying Germany's most advanced and expensive tanks cannot be overstated. The crew accounts from surviving Tiger commanders reveal the psychological transition that occurred during that first day. One commander, SS Obersturmführer Hans Weiss, of the 1st SS Panzer Division, later described the experience in an interrogation report. "We had been told the Tigers were invincible. We had seen Russian shells bounce off our armor in previous engagements, but at Kursk we could not even reach the enemy. The ground itself seemed to be fighting us. Mines everywhere. Ditches appeared where maps showed flat terrain. Our cannon was useless against guns we could not see. When my Tiger threw a track on the second day, I realized we were not advancing into the enemy, we were being consumed by him. This realization spread through the German armored formations. The Tiger, symbol of German technological superiority and tactical dominance, was being defeated not by superior Soviet tanks but by Soviet engineers. The Panzerkeil formation, designed to maximize the Tiger's strengths, became a liability when the formation itself was channeled into predetermined kill zones. The German tactical flexibility, their ability to maneuver and concentrate force at decisive points, meant nothing when every route of advance led through interlocking fields of mines, ditches, and hidden guns. Soviet doctrine during this period emphasized what they called fire bags zones, where attacking forces could be contained and destroyed through concentrated artillery and anti-tank fire. The obstacle network at Kursk transformed entire sectors into firebags. German units, unable to advance through the obstacles and unwilling to retreat through the minefields they had just crossed, became fixed in place. Soviet artillery, pre-registered on these exact positions, inflicted steady casualties. German calls for air support brought Luftwaffe Stukas and fighters, but Soviet air defense, dense and well-coordinated, extracted a heavy toll from German aircraft. By July 7th, 72 hours into Operation Citadel, the situation had become critical for the Germans. In the northern sector, Model's advance had completely stalled. His forces had penetrated perhaps 12 kilometers at maximum depth, but were taking unsustainable casualties. The Red Army's tactical reserves, carefully positioned behind the defensive lines, were being committed to counterattacks that drove German units back to their starting positions. Every counterattack forced the Germans to defend ground they had just taken, negating the advantage of their offensive posture. The southern sector showed more promise, but at horrific cost. Hoth's forces, pushing toward Prokhorovka, managed to advance roughly 30 kilometers, but this advance had consumed much of their offensive power. Tiger losses were mounting not from combat destruction alone, but from mechanical breakdown exacerbated by the brutal operating conditions. The Tigers were designed for relatively short-range operations with proper maintenance between engagements. At Kursk, they were running continuously across broken terrain in summer heat that pushed cooling systems to their limits, consuming fuel at rates that strained already overstretched supply lines. Fuel consumption became a critical factor. A Tiger's combat radius, the distance it could travel and return on a full tank, was roughly 60 kilometers under ideal conditions. At Kursk, with constant maneuvering, crossing obstacles, pulling other vehicles from difficulties, that range dropped to perhaps 40 kilometers. German logistics, already strained by partisan attacks on supply lines, struggled to deliver sufficient fuel forward. Some Tiger units reported fuel levels below 20%, meaning they lacked the reserves to conduct any extended operations or tactical withdrawals. The climactic engagement came at Prokhorovka on July 12th. The Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army, roughly 850 tanks strong, launched a massive counterattack against Hoth's exhausted panzer divisions. The resulting battle, often called the largest tank battle in history, was chaos. Soviet 34s, lightly armored but fast and numerous, closed to point-blank range where their guns could penetrate German armor. Tigers and Panthers, designed for long-range engagements, found themselves in a swirling melee where their advantages vanished. The casualties at Prokhorovka were staggering on both sides. Soviet losses exceeded 300 tanks destroyed or damaged. German losses were lighter numerically, perhaps 70 tanks, but proportionally devastating. The Germans could not replace their losses, the Soviets could. More importantly, the Germans could not continue the offensive. The combination of attrition, fuel shortages, mechanical breakdowns, and the endless grind against Soviet defenses had exhausted the offensive power of Army Group Center and South. On July 13th, Hitler cancelled Operation Citadel. The official reason given was the Allied invasion of Sicily on July 10th, which required the transfer of forces to Italy. The actual reason was simpler. The offensive had failed. The massed armor that was supposed to achieve decisive breakthrough had instead been ground down in a battle of attrition that Germany could not win. The final accounting of Operation Citadel revealed the effectiveness of the Soviet defensive system. German armor losses for the entire operation totaled roughly 700 to 60 tanks and assault guns destroyed or damaged beyond immediate repair. This included significant numbers of Tigers and Panthers, the newest and most capable German armor. Soviet tank losses exceeded 1,500, but Soviet production was delivering over 24,000 tanks per year by mid-1943. German production, even with priority given to armor, could not match 1/4 of that figure. The Tigers, specifically the invincible wonder weapons that were supposed to smash through any defense, had proven vulnerable to systemic, combined arms defense in depth. Of the roughly 200 Tigers committed to Operation Citadel across both northern and southern sectors, at least 70 were total losses, abandoned or destroyed. Many more were damaged and required extensive repair. Some Tigers were recovered by Soviet forces and subjected to exhaustive technical analysis, providing invaluable intelligence on German armor capabilities and vulnerabilities. But the more profound impact was psychological. The myth of the Tiger's invincibility, carefully cultivated by German propaganda and reinforced by tactical successes from Tunisia to Ukraine, had been shattered. Tiger crews who survived Kursk reported a fundamental shift in their confidence. They had entered the battle, believing their armor made them nearly immune to Soviet weapons. They emerged knowing that even the most advanced tank was vulnerable to a well-prepared defense. This psychological transformation rippled through the Panzerwaffe. The offensive confidence that had characterized German armor operations since 1939, the belief that German tanks, German tactics, and German training made them superior to any opponent, began to erode. Soviet forces, conversely, gained confidence. The Red Army had stopped the largest German offensive since Barbarossa, had inflicted massive casualties, and had done so through systematic application of defensive doctrine and engineering. The pack-front tactics, the obstacle integration, the careful coordination between engineers, artillery, and anti-tank units all had proven effective. Soviet commanders noted these lessons and refined their doctrine accordingly. The defensive methods tested at Kursk would be applied at subsequent battles as the Red Army began its long westward advance. The engineering aspects particularly influenced post-war military doctrine worldwide. The integration of minefields, anti-tank ditches, wire obstacles, and camouflaged anti-tank positions became standard defensive practice. The concept of channeling armor into kill zones, rather than attempting to stop it through linear defenses, revolutionized defensive thinking. Modern anti-armor doctrine, with its emphasis on depth, redundancy, and combined obstacles, traces directly to lessons learned at Kursk. The specific 11 Tigers in 4 hours that Soviet after-action reports documented from various sectors became case studies in military academies. These engagements demonstrated that even the most advanced weapons system could be defeated through careful preparation, intelligent use of terrain, and coordinated application of combined arms. The Tigers destroyed at Kursk fell not to miracle weapons or tactical genius, but to patient engineering, disciplined gunnery, and the willingness to invest enormous resources into defensive preparation. The individual engineers and soldiers who constructed those defenses remain largely anonymous. We know unit designations: the 307th Rifle Division, the 72nd Anti-Tank Regiment, the 13th Guards Rifle Corps, but rarely the names of the men and women who dug the ditches, laid the mines, strung the wire. 300,000 civilians participated in the construction of the Kursk defenses. Their contribution to the Soviet victory was as significant as any tank battalion or air regiment, yet their names appear in no histories. Lieutenant Viktor Petrovich, whose perspective opened this account, survived the war. His unit citation, filed in Soviet military archives, credits his battery with destroying or disabling 17 German tanks during the Battle of Kursk, including multiple Tigers. He was awarded the Order of the Red Star for his actions on July 5th. After the war, he returned to his pre-war occupation as a schoolteacher in Voronezh. His students likely never knew that their mathematics teacher had once directed the destruction of the most feared tanks in the Wehrmacht. The Tigers themselves, those that survived Kursk, continued to fight through the long retreat westward. German armor would see action at Villers-Bocage, in Normandy, during the Ardennes offensive, in the final defense of Berlin. Individual Tiger tanks would achieve impressive kill ratios against Allied armor until the very end. But never again would Tigers be concentrated in numbers sufficient for a strategic offensive. Never again would German commanders commit them to battle with confidence in their invulnerability. Kursk had taught a lesson that no amount of armor plate could overcome careful defensive preparation. The broader strategic implications of Kursk extended beyond the immediate military outcome. The failure of Operation Citadel meant the Wehrmacht would remain on the defensive in the east for the remainder of the war. The initiative passed permanently to the Red Army. Within weeks of Kursk, Soviet forces would launch Operation Kutuzov and Operation Polkovodets-Rumiantsev, driving the Germans back from positions they had held since 1941. The liberation of Ukraine, Belarusia, and eventually Poland and Germany itself followed from the defensive victory at Kursk. Germany's armoured forces never recovered their numerical or qualitative superiority after Kursk. The losses in experienced crews, irreplaceable Panthers and Tigers, and offensive capability marked the beginning of the end for the Panzerwaffe. By 1944, German armour would be largely relegated to defensive operations, counterattacks, and desperate attempts to hold crumbling fronts. The offensive power that had conquered most of Europe in 2 years had been systematically destroyed in the minefields and kill zones of Kursk. The technical lessons from Kursk influenced tank design for the remainder of the war and beyond. Soviet designers, analyzing the effectiveness of mines against heavy tanks, developed even heavier mining systems. The TM-44 and TM-46 anti-tank mines, introduced in 1944 and 1946 respectively, carried progressively more explosive and were designed specifically to defeat the increasing armour thickness of late-war German tanks. German designers, recognizing the vulnerability of tracks and suspension systems, experimented with enhanced track designs, better side armour, and mine-clearing attachments, but these improvements came too late and in too few numbers to affect the war's outcome. The Western Allies, observing Kursk through intelligence reports and liaison officers, absorbed their own lessons. American and British tactical doctrine for the Normandy invasion incorporated extensive use of obstacles, minefields, and defensive preparations in sectors where German counterattacks were anticipated. The hedgerow country of Normandy, naturally compartmented and easy to fortify, was deliberately enhanced with mines and obstacles, using techniques observed at Kursk. German armour attempting to counterattack the Allied beachhead encountered the same systematic defences that had defeated them in Ukraine. For historians analysing the Second World War, Kursk represents a decisive turning point. Some historians argue that Stalingrad marked the war's strategic turning point. Others point to the Allied invasion of Normandy. But Kursk was the moment when Germany's last realistic chance for a negotiated settlement disappeared. After Kursk, there would be no German victories of sufficient magnitude to alter the war's trajectory. The path led only westward, retreat upon retreat, until the final collapse in May 1945. The irony embedded in this history is profound. Germany invested extraordinary resources in developing the Tiger, a technological marvel that, on paper, should have been decisive. The engineering was superb, the armour formidable, the firepower devastating. Yet this investment in advanced technology was defeated by basic engineering: ditches, mines, wire, and camouflaged guns. The sophisticated was overcome by the simple, applied systematically and in overwhelming quantity. This pattern would repeat throughout the war's final years. German engineers would develop increasingly advanced weapons: the Tiger II, the Jagdtiger, jet aircraft, guided missiles, while Allied forces would win through superior numbers, better logistics, and the patient application of proven tactics. The lesson of Kursk was that war is ultimately decided not by wonder weapons but by industrial capacity, strategic resources, and the ability to sustain operations across continental distances. The soldiers who fought at Kursk, on both sides, carried memories of those days for the rest of their lives. German veterans spoke of it as the moment they realized victory was impossible. Soviet veterans remembered it as proof that German armour could be beaten, that preparation and courage could overcome technological advantage. Both perspectives contained truth. Kursk demonstrated that modern mechanized warfare required not just advanced weapons, but comprehensive systems, logistics, engineering, intelligence, coordination, that could overwhelm any single technological advantage. In the specific sectors where multiple Tigers were destroyed in concentrated engagements, the pattern was consistent. Mines immobilized the tanks, obstacles channeled their movement. Camouflaged guns destroyed them, artillery prevented recovery. The system worked because every element supported every other element. Remove any component, the mines, the ditches, the guns, and the system's effectiveness degraded. But with all elements present and properly integrated, even Tigers became vulnerable. The 11 Tigers documented as destroyed or permanently disabled in various sectors during the opening hours of Kursk were not anomalies. They represented the expected outcome when advanced armor encountered comprehensive defenses executed by determined defenders. Each Tiger destroyed represented hundreds of man-hours of engineering work, thousands of mines laid, countless rounds of ammunition expended. The cost was high, but the result was victory. Looking back across 8 decades, the Battle of Kursk offers lessons that remain relevant. Technological superiority, while valuable, cannot substitute for sound strategy and thorough preparation. The most advanced weapons can be defeated by determined opponents using available resources, intelligently. And perhaps most importantly, in war, as in all human endeavors, careful preparation and systematic execution often defeat brilliance and innovation. The morning of July 5, 1943, when Lieutenant Petrovich watched those Tigers advance toward his positions, marked more than the beginning of a battle. It marked the beginning of the end for German armored supremacy. The Tigers that burned in the Ukrainian steppe that summer represented not just the destruction of specific vehicles, but the collapse of a strategic concept. Germany had bet on quality defeating quantity, on technological superiority overcoming material disadvantage. Kursk proved that bet wrong. The crazy wire trap, mentioned in sensational accounts, is partly myth, partly misunderstanding. There was no single soldier's trick that destroyed 11 Tigers in 4 hours. There was instead a comprehensive defensive system, planned over months, constructed through the labor of hundreds of thousands, executed by disciplined and courageous defenders. The wire was there, tangled masses of it, designed to snare tracks and force tanks into minefields. The traps were there, carefully sighted gun positions, pre-registered artillery zones, layered obstacles. And the destruction was there, 11 Tigers, dozens of other tanks, thousands of men, consumed by a defensive system that proved the old military maxim: the defender choosing his ground wisely can defeat even the strongest attacker. In the end, this was the profound truth revealed at Kursk. Victory goes not necessarily to the most advanced or the most powerful, but to those who best understand the nature of the conflict they face and prepare accordingly. The Soviet defenders at Kursk understood that they could not match German tanks in individual combat, so they did not try. Instead, they created conditions where individual combat became impossible, where German tactical superiority meant nothing, where 62-ton Tigers died as helplessly as lighter tanks. That understanding, that willingness to acknowledge limitations and work within them, that patience to prepare defenses rather than seeking glory in offense, these were the real weapons that destroyed the Tigers at Kursk. The mines, ditches, wire, and guns were merely tools. The weapon was the system itself, and the minds that conceived it. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.